I'm glad. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Take number 2. I hope you guys are doing well and enjoying the conference. Welcome to this session on waste. What's waste got to do with it? Reducing greenhouse gas emissions by controlling waste. My name is Nicole Berge. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering here at the University of South Carolina, and I will be the moderator of this session. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the organizers of this session, the Climate Reality Project, Greater Columbia Area, South Carolina chapter, and the Midlands group of the South Carolina Sierra Club. They've really put together a wonderful session for us today, have some amazing speakers. So I'm really excited about being a part of this. This session in particular is something that I'm really excited about. When you hear waste, it's not something that a lot of people like to talk about or really think much about, but that couldn't be opposite from me, more opposite from me. I love talking about trash. And my students laugh at me all the time when I say this, and I get strange looks like many that I just got, but it's because I love talking about waste. I spent the last 22-ish years of my career doing all different kinds of research in the waste area, thinking about how we manage trash and if we're managing it in a sustainable way, and how we may be able to change what we do to make things a little bit more sustainable or do things a little bit better. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk with all of you about trash. Now, before we get started with the panel discussion, I do just have a couple of slides that I wanted to share with all of you just to set the stage for our panel discussion. So waste generated in the US, I think many of you probably know this, but we generate a lot of waste here in the United States, a lot. In 2018, we generated 292.4 million tons of trash. South Carolina's contribution was about 4.3 million tons, but nonetheless, quite a significant amount of trash that we generate. This correlates to about 4.5 to 4.8-ish pounds of waste per person per day that we generate, right? So all of us are generating 4.5 to 4.8-ish pounds of waste per day, which is pretty significant. When you think about the things that we throw away, if you look at this pie chart, you see here on the screen, this shows the different things that are in the waste stream that we generate. Some of the larger components include paper. It's about 23% of the waste we throw away. Some other things to note include food. 22% of the waste we generate each year. Yard trimmings, plastics, things like that. So again, these are all the things that are in the trash that we end up throwing away each day. So how is this waste managed? Here in the United States, 50%, approximately 50% of the waste we generate gets sent to a landfill, right? It's a pretty significant chunk of our waste. Recycling comprises about 24% of how we manage our waste, followed by combustion with energy recovery. Then there's some composting and some other things that we do with food waste. But again, here in the United States, the majority of our waste is sent to a landfill. And this is true nationally as well as here in South Carolina. And when we think about what the greenhouse gas emissions may be from the waste industry, a lot of that is tied to how we manage our waste. And those greenhouse gas emissions are shown here in this figure. Here on the x-axis, you have million metric tons of CO2 equivalents. And what you have here on the x-axis are the different ways in which we manage our waste. And as you can see here, landfills are responsible for emitting the most greenhouse gas emissions in the waste industry. Now, this is tied to, of course, the fact that we are sending the majority of our waste there. So that certainly plays a role in these high greenhouse gas emissions. But as you can see, for incineration, composting, and anaerobic digestion, the number or amount of greenhouse gas emissions certainly decreases pretty significantly. I think it's also important to point out that when you think about all greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted, the waste sector is only responsible or only emits about 2.6% of those emissions. So although this may be a relatively small part of the pie, doing some things here to reduce those emissions can still have a significant impact. Now, also tied to greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted from the waste industry is not just how we manage our waste, but it's very much rooted in the types of waste we throw away and how those specific wastes are managed. And that's what's shown here on this table. So you have different materials that we throw away. So these are all of the different components of the waste that is generated. And what you have in this next column are greenhouse gas emissions. And again, this is in million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. Anywhere that you see parentheses, this is really a negative number. So it means that we have a benefit. And what you can see here is if you look at paper, for example, we have a negative about 155 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents associated with managing this waste. The reason this is negative is because we do a pretty good job of recycling our paper, right? And so it's negative because of that. We're reducing the amount of virgin materials that are needed to create and produce more paper. However, if you look down this list, there are some other concerns with some of these waste materials that we generate and throw away. I want to focus on the three waste materials that are of the focus of this session. I want to talk a little bit about plastics, food, and yard trimmings. And when you look at this table, you can see plastics. If you compare this to all of these different numbers, certainly has the largest greenhouse gas emissions, at least currently associated with it. Food, although it's negative, I think there's significant potential to make this much more negative than it is. And then we have yard trimmings, that is also one of the positive greenhouse gas emission waste materials. I want to spend just a second talking about each of these briefly. I want to talk a little bit with food waste management. We waste a lot of food here in the United States, a lot. Food production itself requires significant resources, a lot of energy, a lot of water, a lot goes into producing food. And unfortunately, we waste a fairly significant fraction of this. The amount of food that goes into a landfill, as well as that's being combusted, is greater than any other single material. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to think a little bit more about how we're managing our food waste. One of the big disadvantages with food waste is when you take the food waste and you put it in a landfill, food waste degrades very fast, right? If you leave food out at home in the kitchen in an open container, it's gonna start to be moldy. You start to have a lot of microbes that come and start to break it down. And the same happens when you put this in a landfill. Unfortunately, the food waste, because it degrades so quickly, it often happens before a cover is placed on the landfill. So you end up losing the majority of those gas emissions, the methane and carbon dioxide that are produced to the atmosphere. And if you look at this pie chart and how we currently manage our food waste, 78% of that waste is sent to a landfill. And these are average numbers across the United States, with the second largest fraction being combusted with energy recovery. When we talk about yard waste, again, this is one of the few positive greenhouse gas emission waste that we have. We do compost a fair amount of yard waste here in the US. We compost about 63% of the yard waste that we generate, and we landfill 30%, combust a slightly smaller fraction, about 7% of the yard waste that's generated. If we move on and talk about plastics, I think many of you are probably familiar with. This waste stream has gained a lot of attention for a lot of negative reasons lately. I think source reduction is quite critical when we think about managing managing plastic waste. About 99% of plastic is made from fossil fuels, so that's pretty significant. And as these plastics break down, they release greenhouse gas emissions. So making sure that we manage them appropriately is really important. Here in the US, we landfill about 75% of the plastic waste that we generate. We only recycle about 9%, and we combust with energy recovery about 16% of the plastic waste that we generate. I'm sure you guys have heard about microplastics. that are found in oceans. This is certainly a huge issue. In addition, something else that I want to point out is that the United Nations General Assembly has included the issue of plastics as a priority during its 73rd session. So there's a lot of attention that is being paid to plastics, rightfully so. I think plastics are a significant issue that we need to be thinking about as a society. So that leads us to, hopefully that was a good background, I guess, on some of the topics that we're going to talk about today through our panel. But this takes us to our main attraction, our panel discussion today. We have 3 speakers lined up, 3 really wonderful speakers. I'm really excited about this. So what I'd like to do now is introduce all of the speakers, and then what we'll do is I have a couple of questions that have been developed by the organizers of the committee. We'll go through and talk through those. And after that, we will open up questions for the audience. Okay? All right, so one of our panelists, our first panelist is Richard Chesley. There. Richard is the manager of DHEC's Office of Solid Waste Reduction and Recycling. He's been with the office since its beginning in 1991. The office provides technical assistance, outreach and education, and grant funding to local governments, schools, and colleges and universities, as well as technical assistance to organizations and businesses. One of the key initiatives developed by his office is the Don't Waste Food South Carolina campaign. So I'm excited about hearing about that. Again, I think food waste is a significant issue, and I'm really excited to have Richard here to talk today more about this. So welcome. Our next panelist is Stefan Holt. Welcome. Stefan is Vice President of Marketing for Atlas Organics. He has 20 years of marketing experience and driving revenue through the entire sales cycle. Stefan's background as a small-scale farmer allows him to use his knowledge of organic growing to drive new business leads and educate consumers about the entire process of creating quality compost. He's worked extensively in the broadcasting industry for more than 15 years. For example, he worked here at WIS and a couple of other stations across South Carolina. He was the leader for e-commerce at Grace Management Group and as the director of marketing for Southern Management Corporation. Stefan has 4 children and loves to spend his free time enjoying nature, his farm, and his family. So welcome, Stefan. I'm excited to have you here as well and hear more about Atlas and composting. I think it's something that we can certainly do a lot more here in the US, so excited to hear about that. Our third panelist is Hoiyin, and she will be joining us virtually. She is in California. Hoiyin is a volunteer with the Sierra Club California, works mostly on waste, energy, and climate issues. She encourages everyone to engage in regular dialogues with their elected officials, educate them while you learn about more sustainable lifestyle. MLK said, education without social action is a one-sided value because it has no true power potential. So welcome, Hoiyin. I'm excited to have you here. I love the quote that you provided in your bio. I look forward to hearing more inspirational takes on our waste and climate issues through this panel. So thanks. So panelists, thank you all for being here. Do you guys want to stay where you are? Do you want to come up front, or how would you guys like to do this?
However you want, doesn't matter.
Up to you. You guys okay there? Awesome. All right, we will just move from there. So what I'll do is I'm going to ask.
I think it would be helpful to
have them up front. Okay, awesome. Come on up.
Yeah, they need to be close to the mic.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it's not.
You're just gonna pull our chairs up there, or?
We're ready. Yeah, yeah.
That's fine.
Sounds good.
We'll make this very informal. How about that?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Do we need anything as far as presentation?
No. I don't think so. You could always, if we have time at the end, then we can put them up. That would be great.
So,
All right.
we'll sit on the same side.
Nah.
Social distancing, right?
Recycling, composting.
There you
It's
go.
all the same. It's all good.
All right, so first question, and we'll just start with Stefan this time, move over to Richard, and then Hoiyin, if you're able to answer after that, that would be wonderful. So in each of your areas of expertise, What waste-related practices are working well, and what are the greatest challenges you experience?
Okay, thank you, first of all, for inviting Atlas Organics to be a part of this conference. As you mentioned, our waste stream obviously is organic food waste, yard waste, and of course we do biosolids. That's a part of the composting process. Those are three different types. The biggest thing that we run into is education. And I think that's the great thing about this conference. It's educating consumers that they can make an impact. Part of our mission statement at Atlas Organics is that we believe people can and should do something to contribute to something larger than themselves. We believe that there's a hero in everyone. And so everybody can make an impact. You just shared a bunch of statistics in terms of the food waste and the yard waste that's going on. And so education is probably our biggest challenge. This is a new industry for a lot of people. And there are a lot of young people that are actually working actively to change the direction of our planet. I kid with my, I kind of joke with my children and I say, I'm literally changing the earth every time I go to work. And that's a good feeling. And so I would encourage everybody that's in here to think about the impact that you can make, educate somebody about that, and then take action. Because without action, it's all just pie in the sky. So that's the biggest hurdle is education. But the waste streams that we have, I mentioned food waste, yard waste, and of course we do biosolids as well.
Thank you. Sure.
Same question?
Same question.
Okay, let's hope it'd be, where do I shop or something? Can everybody hear me that wants to?
Answer that one.
A little louder, if you don't.
Can everyone hear me that wants to?
Yeah.
Okay. I am with DHEC's Office of Solid Waste Reduction Recycling. I'm delighted to be here and thank you for having me. Delighted Atlas is here because from my vantage point, we need Atlas desperately. We need infrastructure. And they're a huge, a significant part of South Carolina's infrastructure dealing with organics recovery. And delighted that you're here. I'm waving.
No, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I'm glad you're here. Outreach education, obviously, funding and infrastructure are the key issues we're dealing with. We do quite a bit. I think Stefan will endorse this, or not endorse, but food waste prevention lessons. We provide grant funding to local governments and schools and college universities on food waste prevention composting programs. One of our big successes until COVID was we had schools would not do, I think everyone's familiar with share tables at schools. When there's specific food that's extra or unwanted, you can put it on a table, then a student or a child that's not as maybe still hungry or not as fortunate can come by and take that at no questions asked. So we would always get the call that DHEC doesn't allow us to have share tables. And I would always say, I'm DHEC and you can do it. So we work with the Department of Education on getting the word out on that. And we also have a huge technical assistance effort in schools simply because the cafeteria can be a classroom. So infrastructure is another issue. We have, and when I started with the office in 91, we did not have a pencil. We were created in 91 with Solid Waste Policy and Management Act. Didn't have a pencil. The first recycled content item we had, we put it on the bookcase like it was the Smithsonian. Just like, but I've been around long enough to see the paradigm shift in lots of issues. Electronics, for years, we didn't do anything. We didn't recover them. And we did very little with unwanted or food waste simply because we didn't have our organics regulations were out of date. We couldn't get infrastructure to come here unless they knew what the rules were, which is only fair. So those finally got updated a few years ago. So now we have infrastructure. We have 4 or 5 counties and municipalities that have food waste prevention programs in place. And lots of good things going on. Is that?
That's great.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Richard. Hoiyin, if you can hear this, we would love for you to jump in on this question as well.
Yes, good morning from California. I'm so flattered to be here. It's wonderful to know what's happening in South Carolina. Yeah, I totally agree. Education is very important and it's challenging. And infrastructure is really important for anything to really happen. I want to add that there's also the challenge of our habits of waste. On that note, I mean, I think all of us try to waste less, but each of us still has a long way to go. Part of the effort is also to talk, as Dr. Berge said in my intro, is to talk to the people with power, ask them to provide funding for more infrastructure, also to rescue more edible food to feed the hungry. So that's probably my short answer for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Hoiyin. Appreciate that. All right, question number 2. We'll start with Richard this time. All right, what ideas and policies have you discovered relate to your work in reducing waste and greenhouse gas emissions that you're most excited about?
That's easy. I've been at the agency 31 years, doing lots of things. Some worked, many didn't. Don't Waste Food campaign is the best thing I've been involved with. Everybody wins. Prevent food waste. If you're, at households, you can save money, conserve resources. Through donation, you can help feed those in need. 1 in 9 South Carolinians are food insecure. So that's a major issue. I also win personally and from the office perspective because if you keep food waste out of the landfill, our recycling and recovery rate goes up. Diversion of food waste is it's one of the last it is the last low-hanging fruit. No pun intended, really. Food waste is the #1 item that is disposed of in a class or municipal solid waste landfill, the #1 item. We waste about, as you well know, the numbers go back and forth as far as, but it's roughly about 40% of the food produced in the United States is never eaten. It's the #1 thing, Americans, the #1 thing we throw away is food. Yet there's 1 in 9 South Carolinians that are food insecure, and that includes 1 in 7 children. We look at those food date labels, et cetera. That's an issue because they're confusing. That's legislation is being addressed or being offered to address that issue. It's a huge issue. My mother-in-law just passed. If it said it was Best Buy April 2nd, it went out April 2nd or April 3rd. It's just a huge. By the way, we generate most food waste at home, but my ultimate point is this campaign, and that's why I keep talking about it, is the most exciting. I think it will be super effective. I think we're one of the first, if not the first state to do it, campaigns to get the word out to everybody, schools, households, residents, et cetera, businesses to fight this issue. And by the way, food waste, to repeat, because it's so important. Landfills are the 3rd largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And what produces the most greenhouse gas emissions in a landfill? Well, for most, food waste is the #1 thing going to it. So there's a connection there, and it's probably why I'm here.
Thank you. Hoiyin, would you like to answer this question?
Yes, I actually, I was also quite happy to see Don't Waste Food South Carolina program, the website and the YouTube. Thank you. You're doing a good job. Actually, the education you guys do there, based on the limited I know, is really not different from what we're doing in California. I want to add a little bit on education part. I think it's the people here, we got, I don't know, maybe we have 40 people here today. So I think it's everybody's responsibility to share the words and tell people that organic waste emits methane, which is a major contributor to climate change, global warming. I say this all the time to my neighbor. I actually, sometimes I feel kind of embarrassed. I'm like, nagging all the time. But over the years, a little bit, something changed. Now my neighbor sends me text, hey, we have extra food. You want food? Yes, I want food. So I think sometimes nagging helps, it brings change. I think I'll just end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan.
I have a whole lot to say, so I'll try to condense it. My wife told me not to talk too fast, so I'll slow down. Wow, you mentioned infrastructure earlier, and we talked about the greenhouse gases. I think I saw a statistic, and this is where us as a society, we get hung up with statistics, but one of the statistics I saw was, if you were to equate all the food waste in the entire world to a country, I think the food waste would rank number 3 behind China and the US in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. That's incredible. That is a huge statistic. And I'm not a statistic person. I'm more of a story person. But if you can wrap your head around that and then wrap your head around the idea, okay, infrastructure is a huge problem. Atlas Organics is a private company. We work with cities and municipalities to create and understand what are the infrastructure problems, capabilities, and then we come in as a service and a solution provider to eliminate those. I mean, that's how we grow. We're probably one of the fastest growing composting companies in the United States, and most people haven't heard of us. We're in 5 states right now. We're probably going to be in, well, we're in 6 states if you count the pilot program in Connecticut. We're going to be in California fairly quickly, so we'll be in Hoyt's neck of the woods. So we're doing that. But we are quickly growing. And so when it comes to all of these problems, when it comes to the greenhouse gas, I usually tell the story. I say, if you can't get on the playing field as a city or a municipality, or even as a community, then you're not even in the game. And so you have to figure out what's the playing field and do we need to change the rules? So it comes to what Hoya was saying about, we have to be involved in local communities, local governments, local cities. We have to be involved in those, unfortunately, sometimes boring council meetings, and you have to be involved. I mean, you just have to be. Otherwise, you can't control the game. You can't control the narrative that's being talked about. So that's what I would say to that question. But I literally have a half hour's worth of conversation that I could have with people on what we're doing to try to make a difference. I mentioned we're probably one of the fastest growing composting companies in the country. I mean, a couple years ago, we only had maybe 3 dozen employees. We're over 150 right now, and we're still hiring. So that ought to tell you that there's an appetite to change the direction of the United States as well as the planet. And like I said earlier, I get to wake up every day saying, you know what? I'm literally changing the planet. I'm changing the world every time we make compost and educate somebody on how they can contribute to that process, whether it be a commercial, industrial, or even a private citizen. We have residential collection services, kind of like the old school milkman. They come to your door, pick up your compost. We have that program. It's not available in every location, but it's available in the upstate, it's available in Tennessee and Memphis and Chattanooga. So there are things you can do even as an individual to change the direction of the planet, change the direction of greenhouse gases, and to just change the idea that you can make a difference. Okay. That's my short answer.
Thank you. I like it. Thank you. All right, next question. So Hoiyin, if you wouldn't mind starting with this one. What existing government policies are playing positive roles in greenhouse gas emissions and waste reduction? And what changes in policies do you think would be beneficial?
Wow, now it's my turn to brag about California. We have a statewide organic waste reduction law that everyone in the state is required to compost. The law actually the bill was signed into law in 2016 with a 4-year lead time. So now I'm going to say, echo some previous points we made here. infrastructure is hard, it's expensive. We need people, residents, to push the political will. Go to city council meetings. Email is very easy, right? We can email them. When you run to your elected officials at grocery stores, walk up to them, tell them that, this is a lower hanging fruit, reducing organic waste is a lower hanging fruit to slow down climate change. Yeah, city council meetings are boring, but it can be very rewarding. So last year, Sierra Club, California, we worked on a bill that was trying. So what happened was that law was going to become effective. Enforcement was supposed to kick in on January 1st, 2022. So cities started saying, well, due to COVID, we're busy, so we don't have the resources to implement this law. And generally, I am a cleanup volunteer. So I started going to city councils to tell them to ban plastic bags, these single-use plastics. And I have been to enough city council meetings over the years just to run into these talks about this new law. I would just say it's SB 1383. So, so now if I say this again later, you know what I mean, this number. And over the years, I just wondered, what is going on with this thing? They just talk about it. When is some action going to happen? So last year, I discovered there was a new bill that was trying to delay the implementation. So we started, actually one volunteer said, we need to do something. And so he kind of pushed me into doing something. I mean, heck, where did I get time to do work on another bill? That's what I'm thinking about. But it's displaying some of the elected officials are really into doing. So another thing is that to implement this law, which means we need money for infrastructure, organic waste, recycling, all that. So there's a cost. So ratepayer would pay a little bit more in your monthly bill. It's like between $3 to $5. One city council member, actually a Republican, said, for the cost of half a pizza, we bring modern recycling to the city. So I thought that was really cool. I use that a lot, and that actually works. So let's just think about the big picture. And another small thing, I wanted to go back to the plastic part. There is another law that's trending in the country. It's footwear accessories serve on request. I mean, these days people get so much to go takeout. And do you need the to-go utensils if you're going to eat at home, right? I know this is a problem in many states. There's not enough political will. Let's start from residents. If you get it to go, and before you leave, and look into your bag, see if there are the utensils there, and then take them out and give it back to the restaurant. You say, I want to save you money. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan?
Yes, there a lot of regulations are starting to pop up. California is one of them, 1383, and we're going to be facing that issue as we start operations in California. And even in Connecticut and some other states, they're starting to implement some of those local rules and those laws. What we do at Atlas Organics is we recognize that there are going to be regulations at different levels of government, whether it be the city, whether it be the state, whether it be the entire country. And we work within those rules. Obviously, if we can change some of them to help the process to save our planet, that's a good thing. But we work within those rules. That's why we're permitted. Composting is a permitted process. Anytime we deal with waste, you have to get permitted by the city, county, municipality. So we have to work within that framework. But what we try to do is we try to, again, going back to education, we try to educate everybody on the process. We try to educate them. We're not your old school mom and pop kind of soil manufacturer. We use a lot of data and technology. So we're able to educate the city, municipality, or industrial partner, or a school, or a hospital, or it could be a sports complex. Food waste happens everywhere, and it's a great feedstock, and that's what we call our inputs. It's a great feedstock for us. We educate them not only that we want that, but on the flip side or the backside, we educate on the impact that they're having. And that's something you can go to a boardroom. That's something you can take to your supervisor or your senior leaders and say, this is what our company, this is what our university, this is what our city, this is what our community. I mentioned we do residential collection. We have a program called Compost House where communities, subdivisions are banding together saying, we want to change and make a difference. And you can do that, and we educate them on the impact that has. So we don't fight regulation, we try to change it, but we try to enhance what we're doing in trying to divert waste from the landfills and actually make usable compost. If we have any golfers, do we have any golfers in here? Do we have anybody that loves to go to the park? Anybody community garden? Any landscapers? Okay, all of those places and things could use our compost. So just to kind of keep that in mind, when the city's talking about building a park for the kids, the park's going to require some type of soil, some type of compost, some type of material for that park. And that's where we can come in. And if you already have the infrastructure in place to divert the waste, you literally have a sustainable loop within your own city, within your own community. We work with community gardens across the country in the places we operate. We operate in Florida. We operate in San Antonio, Texas. We operate in Memphis and Chattanooga. So the city of San Antonio is a great example of working within the framework. They have a curbside organics collection process within the city. We work hand in hand with them. And the organics processing comes to our facility and they dump it off right there. And then we work the process of actually creating the compost. So those are the type of things that I think you work within a framework unless you can change it, and then you maximize what you can do within it.
Wonderful, thank you. Richard.
Oh, wow. There's a lot. The original legislation that created our office and us basically created a comprehensive framework to manage solid waste was back in '91, the South Carolina Solid Waste Policy and Management Act. It is a wonderful piece of legislation, has advanced recycling fees in it, et cetera. Never happened today, not in a million years. I'll have hair before that happens again, but it's a wonderful piece of legislation. And let me fast forward to the fact that we did, part of the legislation gave DHEC the authority to do regulations. One of the things we finally got fixed, and there's a ways to go, was making sure that we could help the Department of Commerce, Recycling Market Development folks, give them the information and rules that we could have infrastructure grow in South Carolina. May I call you Nicole?
Oh, absolutely, please do.
There's no federal legislation on composting at all, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's an issue. I do. I'm not a big brother guy, but I do think when, for your sake and even our sake, you're going into California, a whole nother set of rules, which is fine. You go to Georgia, but I wish there was some sort of comprehensive legislation dealing with organics. The other part of that is, I think we have opportunities, and I don't know if it's through legislation or not. What I'm asking is, on events like this, and each of you, you got to do your part. We keep hearing it. You've got to do your part. You can't put it all on us and hope that we're going to win somebody over. Sometimes we're the last people in state government that can win anybody over. So just understand that. I think, for example, the Department of Transportation, why can't they be required to use a certain amount of compost in their infrastructure, their landscaping, the application? Why isn't that required? Why aren't they required, for example, maybe to use some tires in paving applications, et cetera? I don't know why that couldn't be done to kind of help with the market. I'm not a big brother guy. I'm just trying to, in our own way, address the issue. Let me also say, recycling, the act recycling's not required in South Carolina. It's not. Counties are required to have recycling programs, and of course municipalities have them as well, but counties by law are required to have them. You're required to have a recycling coordinator. You're not required to recycle except a few items. Tires, yard trimmings, lead acid batteries, car batteries. What else? Oh, used motor oil. You can't put any of that in a class 3 landfill. You can drive a hole in the act though, where it says you can take organics to a class 2 landfill or class 1. But I will tell you why I don't see a lot of legislation coming our way. And I will tell you, being there from my perspective, my last point is we've come a long way in the past couple of years. COVID has hurt us. We got infrastructure starting. Horry County's doing food waste recovery at schools. Charleston County and the city of Charleston have started programs. Greenville County has a program. We're talking to Midlands counties having them. Beaufort, it's happening. We're offering for us a huge grant for local governments to set anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000 to set up a program. It's to set it up and start it. We can't continue to fund it. It's not sustainable. So you go back to the funding issue, but things are happening. And again, go back, my last point, do your part. And I get excited about this. Compost at home. You don't have to throw your food waste away. You don't have to put it in the garbage. Make your own soil, nutrient-rich soil amendment and put it in your flower bed in your garden. Richard will be happy.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to add on what Richard just said about the requirements. Yeah, I'm a big composter too. I do it at home as well. I don't have the big fancy blowers and all that stuff that we have at our facilities. But I wanted to say, when you mentioned the Department of Transportation, the state of Texas does have some of those requirements. So it is state by state. And I would just say, we like to band with other composters. It's such a small industry, relatively speaking, to the problem of food waste and just trying to recycle. So we're okay with teaching you how to compost, educating you on gardening, educating you on all of that stuff, because at some point in time, a lot more people are going to need compost. And I think you mentioned you're not an avid gardener, but every once in a while you like to plant stuff. So we want to be there as a resource. And I would encourage you, when you bring up the problem, and city and government folks love this, always bring a solution with that problem. Otherwise, it's just going to be out there in the ether. So we like to think of ourselves as a solution and a service provider whenever that question and that problem gets presented. So always think of Atlas Organics in terms of an organics waste recycler that can help any city and municipality in the country.
Awesome, thank you. All right, next question, and we'll start with you this time, Stefan. What roles have NGOs such as residential communities, businesses, institutions, or charities played in making the changes which resulted in practices that are effective at reducing waste that you're focused on and greenhouse gas emissions? And what roles could these sectors play?
Huge, big impact in terms of NGOs. And organizations and communities. I've kind of mentioned that a little bit, but I'll give you another example right up the street, the BMW Classic that's up in Greenville. They're trying to be zero waste. They started that last year. They have a sustainability row. They invite all types of companies and partners to make that effort possible. Anytime there's an event like a huge wedding or a sports event, that's a great opportunity to educate that particular sport event. We work with the Chattanooga Lookouts, and they try to do zero waste at their facility. And let's face it, people are going to throw hot dogs and sodas and all that stuff away at the ballgame. That's just going to happen. So why not think in terms of that? We partner with, different nonprofit organizations that are trying to be zero. Memphis has a huge association network, and it's all about Clean Memphis. It's all about, trying to reduce the amount of waste that's happening in that community. So again, that's not government related, but they're making an impact. And the more people you can associate and partner with, the better and the bigger the impact is going to be. So that's a
great.
short answer. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Richard.
Agreed. The more the better. We work, very closely with the Recycling Partnership. It's a national group. They're doing great work. I'm in one of the work groups. In fact, I wish it was food waste, but it's not. We work with the Carolina Recycling Association, the Southeast Recycling Development Council. We work with Commerce. Now that's not an NGO. We work with all these associations on U.S. Composting Council to get the word out for any type of on organics recovery. We partner in Palmetto Pride. We work with them. They're a huge help, because it ties into litter anyway. But short answer.
Perfect, thank you. Hoiyin, do you have anything to add to this question?
Yes. Well, I think first Easter's coming up. So I challenge everyone to speak up now how we can do zero waste Easter gatherings. Churches, other community organizations, they all need to lead by example. And when you see the waste at those events, speak up. I actually went to a Rotary Club's lunch event to talk about the plastic trash. And I emailed first, I said, are you going to use single-use plastics at this lunch? And so the guy emailed me back and said, feel free to bring reusable footwear for 30 people. So I went to Salvation Army. The things that there are dirt cheap, right? So I bought metal utensils and I took to the event, and I also took 5 big trash bags and to collect those, the plastic water bottles, things like that. And so they said, okay, in the future, well, she touched us, and so we're going to do zero waste event. Okay, that's what they said. I hope they're doing that. So Easter is a great opportunity to do that. And I see in the chat, somebody brought up, you can't compost in apartments. That is so true. So that's why we need people to go out to speak everywhere. When you go to community events, tell them, tell the community leaders to, the organization should have a position, ask government to implement organic waste program. Forget about the Fed. Federal actions is always the last one to happen. There's just huge amount of political opposition. Speak up. That's probably all I should say. Oh, I also want to add to, earlier I said last year, California had a bill that was trying to delay the implementation of the organic waste reduction law. Because so many volunteers spoke up, so we were able to neutralize that bill. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. All right, one last question to the panel, and then we'll open up for some questions. Richard, we'll start with you on this one. What actions dealing with waste do you suggest our listeners take following this conference?
Oh, well, what actions? Do your part, care. You can compost at home. You can certainly recycle. Sam, City of Columbia, yeah, great program, for example, right in your backyard, Richland County, countywide. You need to recycle, you need to do it right. Don't put things in there that cannot be recycled. I'm all for stickers on carts to make it clear. Compost at home, recycle, compost at work, compost at school, get the word out. We get a lot of criticism when I say we, the issue of recycling, whether it's worth it or not because of the cost. Part of what we're dealing with is it's hard to believe that it's per capita. We pay about, local governments paid about $380 million this past fiscal year 21 managing solid waste. That's huge. But then you go back and look at the per capita, it's like $83 per household is on average. Now, some counties are much higher than others, but it's like the cheapest deal ever. That's not helping us. It's too convenient, too easy sometimes to throw things away, and too inexpensive. So that's one of the issues we're dealing with. But all I ask is, I think all of us need to do our part. We need to speak up. Our actions need to show that we care and set an example for others and take it from there. There's all kinds of, when I started, there was hardly anything on recycling, and my wife didn't know what I was doing. And of course, I barely could spell it. But you get to the point of now you can go anywhere on the web. You have wonderful professors talking about it. Garbage is neat, garbage is fun, and preventing it from hurting the environment and saving resources. My last point, even on the don't waste food, you can save anywhere from, I've seen different numbers, $1,300 to $1,800 a year on food that you bought you didn't eat. You can give yourself a raise. So that's I don't think it's that hard. And the great thing about the food waste, there's all kinds of issues that tires, et cetera. Food waste is solvable. Everybody wins if you do it. Feeding people in need, increasing the state's recycling rate, conserving resources, all the stuff we use to make food, produce food, the water, the energy, the labor, the money, boom, gone if you just throw it away.
Thank you. Hoiyin.
Yeah, I totally agree on the money part. Recently, actually last year, I read that an average American adult wastes food that's equivalent of $3.50 every day. So, there's infrastructure is expensive, but we really just need to rethink how this whole system works. So we end up paying the money one way or another. So might as well do the right thing for the big picture to slow down climate change. One thing I would say is write letters to the editor. Your letter probably will not get published soon or often, but every time you send a letter out, you educate the editor. Over time, you make a change. Another thing I wanted to sort of just repeating myself that we need to try every way. I mean, just now we already discussed many ways to educate other people. Personal actions, do your part, lead by example. But while we grow in a more sustainable way in terms of our own lifestyle, we should really be mindful, talk about it all the time, reach out. Otherwise, if we don't talk to the other side, the gap between the two sides only widens. So that's not good for anybody. So be brave, speak up all the time. Thank you.
Stefan.
Yeah, I agree with both of the panelists here. I will say this, money talks, your money talks. So Hoiyin mentioned compostable products or using hard silverware. There are companies right now that are being created trying to create compostable products to help that process. And that's one way. We work with BPI to make sure that the product coming in there, we can actually churn up and actually create usable compost. So that's one way. Again, it's not a short game that we're playing. I mean, it feels like it, but it's not. I was told this many times is you're running a marathon that never ends. But you have to start, otherwise you'll never run. I mean, you'll be sitting on the sidelines. So it's not a short stint. It's not a quick fix. Infrastructure is huge. But mentality and will, if it perseveres, can actually make a difference and make a change. I grew up in an era, my dad was in the military. So I grew up in an era where he said, eat everything on your plate. We're not wasting food. Plus it's expensive when you have 5 kids in the house. So my grandmother was dirt poor. She grew up on the mudflats or the riverbanks of Louisiana. So she knew what it was like in the 20s and going through the Depression. So we're kind of in a place in society where we're okay with throwing away stuff. But there's going to come a point where things are going to just be insurmountable. A landfill is a hole. If you keep filling it, it will get full. if you don't divert that way, it's simple, just physics. And kids understand this. When you dump out the sand out of a sandbox, it's empty, but when you fill it back up, it's full and you can't put any more in it. There's going to come a point where that's going to happen. So I say, and this is why I love working at Atlas Organics, is why not take that 35–40% that's just going to the landfill, doing nothing but causing harm to our environment, and reuse it, repurpose it, and make it do something good. And so that's what I would encourage you guys to think about. But like I said, money talks. You guys know this. Money talks. So spend your money wisely, invest in people that are supporting things that you believe in, and make a difference. Start at the local level. Each and every one of you in this room can make a difference in your house, in your community, your subdivision, in your neighborhoods, in your cities, in your state. And I think if you think about it in those terms, you'll make a huge impact. And again, I'll recap, you'll be a hero in your own house and eventually in your community. So that's what I would say.
All right, thank you very much. Well, that wraps up the question. Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
We haven't addressed just a quick one. We haven't addressed plastic much. Are you familiar with that advanced recycling legislation that passed in South Carolina? Okay. Well, the bottom line is it's basically about plastic and it's basically about pyrolysis. I'm trying to address plastic is a nightmare for a lot of reasons. We do have communities that are banning bags, et cetera, but it's a nightmare for lots of reasons, including there's so much of it. And then to get any amount that's worth anything, it's so light. But there is legislation. I don't quite understand it. I've heard pro and con. It's called the Advanced Recycling Act or something, but it's for the plastic manufacturers that have opportunities to do with technology to do different things with plastic to keep it out of the landfill. They may create an energy source or whatever, but I just wanted to throw that out. I know that was one of the hot topics we had in our pre-meetings, and I wanted to make sure.
There are definitely technologies that are being developed to come up with ways to take plastics, diverted plastics from landfills and recycling, and convert those plastics to value-added products such as energy sources, either gas or liquid oil of some type, and pyrolysis is one of those.
It's one of the biggest issues in the composting industry as well, is the plastic contamination that we have in our compost process. That's why in San Antonio, we actually pulled from the recycling community and developed AI. We have an AI sort machine, it's patent pending, but it actually is looking and learning the plastics and pulling that plastic out of our material, our feedstock, and putting it to the side. So like you said, it's one of those things. There are paper cups and manufacturers of paper cups that use plastic lining on the inside, and it's a problem for us because it ends up as contamination in our compost.
Yeah,
So we
and
have to
I
deal
think
with
that that's true with all food waste types of things for sure. If you anaerobically digest food waste, plastics are even a bigger concern than in composting. All right, so I want to wrap up the panel. Just a couple of quick takeaways before we open this up to questions. A couple of overreaching themes, I think, that all panelists hit on as they were answering questions. I think there's a need for communities to do more work. I think that there's a need to provide education to community members and to engage, I guess, in that education community with policymakers, people who are actually making the policy decisions. I think waste reduction is something that everyone talked about. That's something that we can certainly practice at home and something that should be promoted. We spend a lot of time talking about food waste. I do a lot of research in food waste, so I agree it's a huge issue. There are so many things that can be and should be done. Here in South Carolina, I don't believe we have any specific regulations associated with how we manage food waste. But in a couple of other states, they have started putting in mandates where they don't allow commercial food waste to go to MSW landfills. I think California, and you may be more familiar with this than me, I think California has instituted some of that, as well as New York and a couple of other states. So just something to throw out there. And I think something else that a lot of people have talked about is diversion of waste from landfills. There's a need for that, not just food waste, not just plastics, but really just about anything. Here in the US, we we manage our waste a lot differently than other places around the world. I'll just share this with you. In the UK, and I might be off on the date, and this may have been postponed because of COVID, but I believe as of 2020 or 2021, they were no longer allowed to landfill anything that had greater than 5% carbon. So think about the stuff that we have. A lot of it has much greater than 5% carbon. So you're talking about inert materials, and that's all that they were allowing to go to landfills. I don't know what the status of that is and how well they've achieved that goal, but I know that that was something that was out there transforming how they manage their waste there. And one last thing that I'll just put in as well as a takeaway, I think that there's a need for funding and technologies, new technologies, to help us better deal with these problematic waste. I think Richard talked a little bit about this with the new regulations with plastics. Many years ago, no one would even think about this pyrolysis process, which I'm happy to talk about with anyone that might be interested. But now there's a need for that. There's a need for developing new technologies to help us better manage our waste. And maybe there are ways that we can recover resources from a lot of the things that we throw away. And personally, I think that there is a need for that. And there are a lot of resources that can be recovered. Okay, so I think that hopefully kind of gives a quick overreaching summary of some of the topics that we covered. What I want to do now is open up our discussion to the audience. We'll try to go back and forth between people online and those of you that are here in person. Does anyone here in person have a question that you'd like to start with? Emma?
Thank you. We had asked you to be a moderator, you've been great, but I'm going to ask you as a panelist and as an expert. Concerning plastics and recycling and pyrolysis, those sorts of things, you've been doing research on microplastics and toxicity, is that correct?
No, I haven't done a lot of work in that area.
Not on toxicity. Okay, that's one of the issues, is that some things can be recycled. The pyrolysis problem is not a matter of recycling plastic. It's a matter, they're trying to call it recovery. It's highly toxic. It is also proven to be a true fire hazard. The latest pyrolysis plant that was built had an immense fire and it polluted, of course, it destroyed their operation. They had to rebuild. It's unproven, and I would not push something unproven in South Carolina at this point. They would love to come here, and the part of the bill that was, it was the poison part. They didn't want DHEC to control or to regulate the plastic. They wanted to call it feedstock and not have DHEC have oversight. That was the problem with it. So I think, just as a takeaway for us, that we, go home and do additional research on the things that we hear, because there's so much information. It's a real glut of it. And then so my thank you for answering that question. And I didn't mean to just get on a soapbox, but I think with Americans as opposed to Europeans, we have been landfilling for so long and it is too cheap. Do you, this is for all the panelists or for you and Hoiyin, since you're more into the non-organics. Do you think that recycling is the first thing we should do, or should we be reducing? Because we Americans throw away a lot. So, what's the right order for reducing plastics so we don't have to look at solutions for managing it?
Well, I'll start and then we can open up to all panelists.
Sure.
I think anytime you're looking at trying to understand the hierarchy of how you should manage waste, source reduction is always at the top, right? I didn't have a chance to put that into my intro slides, but if you look at EPA's hierarchy of how they suggest you manage waste, of course, they recognize that there's not one solution for all communities, but at the top is always reduction. You hear that as elementary school students too, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle, and it always starts with reduce. And so I think the more that you can reduce the waste, then that obviously trickles down and helps everything. There's less waste you have to try to manage. There's less waste that you have to try to divert from landfills. whenever you can reduce, I think that certainly should take priority for sure. Does anybody else want to add
Well,
anything to that?
yeah, it's kind of like a sports team. It's like picking, should we work on our offense or our defense? Well, you kind of work on both at the same time. I'll give you a classic example in the ag community. I mean, you've heard it said before at a farmer's market, you stack it high, watch it fly. So a farmer is compelled to grow more just so he has the appearance, so people will buy. And then there's waste. So it kind of goes back to what you were saying. And then I think I read a statistic, it was 30% of what's grown is actually thrown away before it ever hits the store shelf. So that's your input. That's hard to control when the idea is from a consumer's mind, if I see a lot of it, I'm more inclined to purchase it. So then it's a mind shift. It's that game. And then on the flip side, yes, if you're going to waste it, find a reusable way to take what is waste and actually repurpose it to something that is not waste. So, I mean, I hope that's the answer, but I think it's both. You're playing, and it depends on your house. You could be playing offense first and then defense. If you're in a community, you're working on your defense and less on your offense. But I think you're kind of, that's a sports analogy, and I use those a lot, but I think it kind of gets to the point that you really can't focus on one. You have to focus on both. We're playing this game, and you got to play both sides of it.
Right, and my question was about priority, not eliminate, not recycling, but what's first?
I think,
And what's most effective?
yeah, I think it should, whatever the local playing field that you're trying to focus on.
Well, it should be first, and every, I keep going back to food waste, I'm sorry, but it would apply to any traditional recyclables, recyclables as well, but in food waste, there is loss at every step of the way. Grocery stores overstock because as consumers, we want to think they have lots of stuff and we have this choice, and then they lose. Farmers, there's, that the fruit isn't perfect, the grocery store won't buy it. I mean, if it's a weird shape, it goes on and on. Absolutely, that should be first. The problem is a lot of times is like, even like with Goodwill, if you donate textiles, whatever, it's hard to measure the reduction. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why it hasn't been talked about as much. Although, would you agree, our recycling rate has remained about the same. We've flatlined for about 1.2 million tons per year for 12 years, but our disposal per capita, for the most part, our overall disposal is not growing very much. That tells me something's working, but it's hard to measure. I mean, we have 1 million more people than we did in 2000 in South Carolina, and our disposal isn't up that much. And that tells me something's working. Couldn't tell you what it is.
Absolutely. I mean, measuring how much waste is reduced at the source is incredibly difficult. I do think, and you bring up some really good points, Richard, I think that we are doing a better job at it, but I don't think that there's really a way to show that.
Yeah.
I think EPA tries to do that. Sometimes they can go through and they call it a top-down approach. They look at everything that's been bought and then everything that's been, collected in landfills the best that they can. And still, those are tricky numbers with lots of big errors and things like that. So it's difficult to keep track of.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions. We use a lot of data in our inputs and outputs, and there's a lot of assumptions that you have to assume, but things can change.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to, I'm going to take a question from online and then I'll get back to the audience. Stefan, these questions are directed mostly towards you. There's a desire for you to talk a little bit more about your composting processes,
Sure.
the types of infrastructure that are there and what you might recommend composting wise in small spaces such as apartment complexes where it may be a little bit more difficult to compost.
Yeah, I'll kind of give you our process. We use what we call, at some locations, extended aerated static pile system. Where there's like 5 different composting methods. That's the one we choose because it's the most efficient and it's a lot faster. We have a lot of feedstocks coming in when we work with cities and municipalities. But basically what that says is, in order for compost to happen, you have to have 4 ingredients. That's your nitrogen, your carbon, you gotta have water, and you've gotta have air. So what we do is we actually blow air from the ground up using our blowers into the pile. The traditional windrow systems turn it so that air comes in from the side. So we have, and I mentioned data, we have monitors and sensors inside of those piles, so we know how much water we need to give it. we know how much air needs to come on. And so we change those mixtures. And then of course, we know what's coming in terms of our feedstock. So that's that aerated static pile system. And we have that pretty much at most of our facilities. And the ones that we don't have that on, we're quickly onboarding that process. As far as what we have, I mean, we have big facilities. They're like construction zones. We have, you know, big loaders. We have grinders, these massive grinders. And basically we're shredding, getting it to a compostable kind of size. And then it's going into our process, going through a trommel screen. It's coming out and you know, the back end where we actually create that pile on that ASP pad where we're able to blow that air and control the water and the input. So that's kind of our process in terms of at a commercial site. As far as how, I think it was communities and apartments. It's funny, I mentioned the residential program we have. We actually are talking and we have talked to several different apartment complexes and some subdivisions that are kind of, they're off to their side. They're not incorporated in a big neighborhood, but they're either gated or something, and they have issues within their subdivision's HOA situation. So we've talked to them about, we have what are called drop-off sites at some of our residential collection programs, where we keep it clean, we keep it distinct, and we have our 64-gallon carts sitting right there. They kind of look like recycled carts, but it's for organic waste, and we clearly indicate that on there. So we have that available for apartment complexes. So when I hear that question, I immediately kind of go, oh, I'm not doing a good marketing job. Because we have the ability to do that at apartment complexes. You have to think a little bit outside of the box. And what we like to do is deal with the HOAs or the apartment management companies that are actually managing those sites. And we get them to buy into it. And then usually the residents are the ones kind of talking to them. Again, it goes back to, you can make a difference even if you're in an apartment complex. If you're in a senior home, we've talked about the idea of doing that. In where you have like senior communities, and then they have a collection point, and we do that so that everybody can make an impact. So you're not throwing away, even if you don't use the compost. What's great about that system is the apartment complex can say, we do what's called compost back. So when you sign up for that service, you get compost back, and you decide when you want that back. It's going to have a compost credit. So you can actually donate. If the apartment complex doesn't want to use it for their own landscaping, they can actually donate it to a community garden. And now you have a community garden that's being powered by our compost, which is being powered by the apartment complex and the individual residents of that complex. Kind of a neat thing.
All right, thank you. We're almost out of time. Yes.
Yeah, this is maybe pretty deep, but I grew up in the time when Coca-Cola and milk bottles were refillable. And my comment here is not going to have so much to do about food waste, which is very important, and I appreciate the work you're doing. But it's about the use of the meme, reduce, reuse, recycle. This has been beat into our heads. And this came from the beverage industry, basically to bring in throwaway plastic bottles. And I guess my question is for Hoiyin, because I think we're at the point now where we need a new R in that reduce, reuse, recycle, and that's reject. We need to think about all this stuff that's going to end up in a hole in the ground, and we let ourselves off the hook by saying we're reducing our waste. We're good. Of course, we all do that. But we need to reject all this stuff that gets thrown away. And the new meme, in my opinion, and I'm curious about Hoiyin and what California is doing, we really need to educate people on the reject part, because the consumerism is overwhelming us. We need to keep reduce, but we need to foment reject, in my opinion. I'm curious what's going on in California about that.
Yeah, Hoiyin, hopefully you heard that, if you
Yes.
were able to respond.
Actually, the 5 R's, the 6 R's, however you number them, we always start with refuse first. So that's reject.
Yes.
So we have earlier, I mentioned in California, and also actually this is a trending in the country. Some states, a few states have this law of footwear accessories served on request, means, you know, the condiment packets, utensils, you know, those little things. Restaurants don't give you automatically and unless you ask. So that is one law on refuse or reject. And actually that saves restaurants money. And also it helps Stefan's business too when you have less plastic into the compost pile. I just want to say this one more time that letters to the editor is really important. A lot of people put it in the chat about the microplastic. This whole thing starts as a fossil fuel product. It's a fossil fuel. I have a little bit of good news to share. I hope this would encourage you guys to do more letters to the editor. Last year, October, I think, our team decided to start a letter storm, letters to the editor storm, and a tweet storm. So in February, a bill was introduced on fossil fuel divestment. So that was what our letters called for. And the lawmakers read our letters and the bill has been introduced. I think that is probably the most upstream solution. We need to cut the funding to those polluters. Thank you.
Can I suggest another R? I try to be positive, and refuse and reject really kind of hits people a little bit harsh. I like to think of rethink, because we're changing the game in terms of what we're trying to do here. Reject and refuse, if you've ever met a negative person, you don't get very far with that. But if you say rethink, that would be a better way. And I just want to say thank you guys for having Atlas Organics here. I know we're about to wrap up. I appreciate all your questions. And if you need to see me afterwards, I'll be here and available for anything.
Yeah, thank you. So we are near the end of our session. We can take one quick question.
There was one on the chat that wasn't addressed, which is what are biosolids and how do you use them?
Biosolids is a type of waste, and it's usually coming from the local municipalities, from the wastewater treatment center. It's a human classification of waste, and it gets treated much like if you're reusing the water, the potable water that's in your house. It goes through your waste recycle treatment center, and you can probably answer more about this as far
You're
as
doing fine.
city manager. But anyway, that is what a biosolid is. I don't know the technical term, but that is a permitted class of waste.
It happens that in Colombia, we just visited the waste treatment plant and found that they are using the anaerobic digester,
yes.
To kind of bring it all down, you know, to kind of cook it down to its essence. And those biosolids are actually put in the landfill. So they're just trucked over to the landfill once that's been done. Interestingly, they're also taking the soupy stuff that settles down to the bottom of the landfill. They pump that out and put it into the digester as well. So it's an interesting process, but here in Colombia, we are, we're not doing anything with the biosolids other than putting them in the landfill.
Yeah, and that's mostly because of the regulations that go along with the biosolids. To put anything like that on land, you have to clear a lot of hurdles with metals and things like that. And so that's why, unfortunately, a lot of wastewater treatment plants where they generate those biosolids ends up taking them to landfill.
And one of the last things you want in a landfill is a
It
liquid.
is, yes. Well, it
Any
depends.
type of liquid.
Yeah, you know, if you want to
Whether it's
operate
solid-
the landfill as a bioreactor and
Yeah.
enhance degradation, then putting in liquids would definitely be advantageous, but not everyone does that. And so
There's a
then it
lot of
becomes
testing
needed.
that's done with the biosolids, and I just want to make sure that people at home understand, we test our compost coming out. And I think you mentioned the United States Composting Council has a STA certification program for compost.
Wow.
So if you don't see that label on your compost, then you might want to take a step back and go, okay, let me ask some more questions. They have a great website, Composting Council, I think it's .org or .com. But the STA certification is something where, as a consumer, you can start asking those questions. Again, making an impact with your money is a direct way to change the direction of what we're doing.
Awesome. So let's get to your question and then we'll close up. Sorry, we're running late, guys.
I wanted to thank the panel. I am the person in our neighborhood that has the key to the box in the front for our whole neighborhood to put messages up, and you've incentivized me to, for one, I'm going to start inviting people in my neighborhood to come see my composting.
Great, that's awesome.
What this information is the neighborhood, so thank you
That's
for
awesome.
giving me the braveness to step forward, and put myself out there. But I also wanted to put a quick plug in for Rosewood Market. You can bring your own glass jar or container from home. They will weigh it, and you can use their bulk. You can buy beans and rice and seasonings, herbs. So you don't have to use a plastic disposable bag. You can bring your stuff from home. I think it's the only place that I know of that you don't have to waste plastic. You can bring your stuff from home.
And in Lexington County, if anyone here is in Lexington County, go to the, what is it called? Carrot, help me.
14 carats.
Hey, 14 Carrot, how did I forget
You can
that?
bring your stuff from home there.
You can bring your,
Good to know.
absolutely.
Good to know.
I have some,
All right.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank
no, I was gonna plug, I brought some guides to reducing food waste at home. I also have recycling and all that, but if you want to take some for your, please do.
Are they-
Anything you need, I'll send you.
Are they at the table, are they at the table downstairs?
They're at the table
Thank you
downstairs.
very much.
Oh, yeah.
All right, well,
Well,
thank you, everyone. This has
and
been a
here.
great panel. Sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. I'm sure the panelists would be happy to stick around for a minute or two afterwards to answer any additional questions. All right, thanks, guys, and good rest